You know, we talk a lot about rules. Do this, don't do that. Eat this, don't eat that. Religion, from the outside, often looks like a giant rule book of dos and don'ts. But there's one specific area that I think gets muddy. Or at least, people think it's muddy.
And what area is that?
The ethics of how we treat people, specifically the other. I was reading this forum online, a pretty heated debate actually, about whether the rules of conduct in Islam change depending on who you're dealing with. Like, is it worse to hurt a fellow Muslim than it is to hurt someone who doesn't believe? Is there a double standard when it comes to causing harm?
That is a massive question. And honestly, it's probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of Islamic theology, not just by critics, but sometimes by Muslims themselves.
Right? Because you hear things. You hear rhetoric. So, let's cut through the noise. If we strip it all down to the core texts, the absolute foundation, what does Islam actually say about causing harm to people? And I mean people, period.
If you want the short answer, it's terrifyingly simple. But if you want the real answer, we have to talk about a concept called Zulm.
Zulm. That translates to oppression, right?
Oppression, injustice, wrongdoing. But the linguistic root is actually darkness. When you harm someone, you are creating a spiritual darkness. And here is the thing that answers your question right off the bat. In Islamic theology, Zulm is universally prohibited. There is no asterisk, there is no footnote that says, unless they are a disbeliever.
So, wait. You're saying the prohibition is absolute? Even if the person on the receiving end is arguably an enemy? Or just someone who completely rejects the faith?
Let me give you a famous hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. He said, "Beware of the supplication of the oppressed, for there is no veil between it and God." Now, notice the phrasing. He didn't say the oppressed Muslim. He said the oppressed. Scholars have debated this for centuries, and the consensus is striking. Even if a non-believer is treated unjustly by a Muslim, and that non-believer calls out to God for justice, God answers that prayer against the Muslim.
That's heavy. So, God takes the side of the non-believer against the believer? If the believer is the aggressor?
Exactly. Because justice in Islam is an attribute of God himself. One of his names is Al-Adel, the just. If a Muslim commits injustice, they are acting against the very nature of God. It doesn't matter who the victim is. The act of harm itself is what is detested.
Okay, that's a strong start. But let's dig deeper. Because practically speaking, people categorize. We have us and them. Are you telling me that legally, in the framework of Sharia, the life or property of a non-Muslim is as sacred as a Muslim's?
Yes, and I'll prove it with a principle that governs all of Islamic law. It's a maxim, la darara wa la dirar.
Which means?
Do no harm and do not reciprocate harm. It's a blanket statement. It covers everything. You cannot initiate harm, and you cannot even harm someone just because they harmed you, if it exceeds the bounds of legal justice. This applies to physical safety, property, and even dignity.
Dignity is an interesting one, because usually when we talk about harm, we think of violence, punching someone, stealing their car. But what about, I don't know, cheating someone in a business deal? Or just being nasty?
Oh, the business example is perfect. There's a historical precedent here. The Prophet Muhammad warned specifically about this. He said, "Whoever wrongs a mu'ahid, that's a non-Muslim living under a peace treaty or within the society, or burdens him with more than he can bear, or takes anything from him without his consent, then I will be his prosecutor on the day of judgment."
Whoa. The Prophet said he would be the prosecutor? Against his own follower?
Against his own follower. Imagine that scene. You show up on Judgment Day expecting the Prophet to intercede for you, to save you, And instead, he's standing on the other side of the courtroom, representing the non-Muslim guy you ripped off.
That is a terrifying image. It completely flips the script of tribalism.
Precisely. It destroys tribalism. Islam isn't a team sport where you protect your own players even when they foul. It's a system of ethics that stands above the players.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a second. We see conflict. We see rhetoric where people justify harm. Where does that come from if the texts are so clear?
It comes from confusing war with existence. Yes, there are rules of engagement for warfare, just like in the Geneva Convention. But we are talking about general interaction, neighbors, colleagues, society. The Quran is very specific in chapter 5, verse 8. It says, "Let not the hatred of a people lead you to be unjust."
Let not the hatred of a people lead you to be unjust. That's profound. It acknowledges that you might hate them. You might strongly disagree with them. You might even be enemies. But you still can't be unjust.
Right, you can dislike someone's theology. You can dislike their politics. But you cannot violate their rights. This brings us to the concept of hukuk.
Huk. Rights.
In Islam, rights are divided into two categories. Hukuk Allah, the rights of God, like prayer and fasting. And hukuk al-Ibad, the rights of the servants, meaning people.
And I'm guessing the servants category is the sticky one.
It's the dangerous one. See, the theology is that God is merciful. If you miss a prayer or you break a fast, that's between you and Him. He can forgive that in a heartbeat. He's infinite in mercy. But if you violate the rights of another person, if you slander them, steal from them, hurt them, God will not forgive you.
Wait, God won't forgive? That sounds contradictory to the whole most merciful idea.
He won't forgive you until the victim forgives you. He steps back. He says, "This isn't my debt to forgive, it's theirs." So if you hurt a non-Muslim neighbor, God isn't going to wipe that slate clean just because you pray 5 times a day. You have to go to that neighbor and get their forgiveness. If they don't give it, you're in trouble.
That puts a huge amount of power in the hands of the victim.
It does. There's a famous story. We call it the story of the bankrupt person, the muflis. The prophet asked his companions, "Do you know who the bankrupt person is?" They said, "Someone with no money." He said, "No. The bankrupt person is the one who comes on Judgment Day with mountains of prayer, charity, and fasting."
Sounds like a saint.
You'd think. But he also comes having insulted this one, hit that one, and stolen from this one. So what happens? God takes his good deeds, his prayers, his fasting, and gives them to the victims.
To pay off the debt.
Exactly. And if he runs out of good deeds before the debt is paid, God takes the sins of the victims and piles them onto him.
And this applies regardless of the victim's faith?
The text says people. It doesn't qualify it. If you stole from a Buddhist, your prayers might go to that Buddhist. If you slandered an atheist, you might end up carrying their sins. It's a cosmic transfer of liability. It makes you realize that harming someone is actually an act of self-destruction.
That's a fascinating way to frame it. You're not just hurting them. You're literally bankrupting your own spiritual future. It's pragmatic selfishness, in a way. Don't hurt them, or you will pay.
It forces a level of mindfulness. You know, we often think of harm as physical, but Islam is hypersensitive to verbal harm too. Backbiting, mocking, using derogatory nicknames. The Quran calls backbiting eating the flesh of your dead brother.
Gross, but effective imagery.
And again, does it say only your Muslim brother? While the verse uses brother to emphasize closeness, the prohibition of adiyah, causing hurt, is general. You cannot cause distress to a human heart without just cause. There's a story of a woman who was known for her immense worship, up all night praying, fasting every day. But she was abusive to her neighbors with her tongue.
Just verbal abuse?
Just words. The prophet was asked about her. He said, "There is no good in her. She is in the fire."
Wow. All that worship canceled out by a sharp tongue?
Because she was causing harm. She was a source of pain for those around her. Contrast that with the definition of a Muslim that the Prophet gave. The Muslim is the one from whose tongue and hand the people are safe. Note the word again, the people, not the Muslims. An-nas, humanity.
An-nas. That's inclusive. So, if I walk into a room and I claim to be a believer, the people in that room, regardless of who they are, should feel physically and emotionally safe because I'm there.
That is the litmus test. If your presence makes people nervous, if they fear your hand or your words, your faith is malfunctioning.
This brings up a philosophical question for me. If Islam places such a high value on the sanctity of life and safety, I mean, the Quran says saving one life is like saving all of humanity. Why do we see the opposite narrative so often? Is it just bad PR? Or is there something we're missing about the disbeliever distinction?
It's not just PR, it's context stripping. There are verses about war, about fighting back against oppression. If you take a verse meant for a battlefield 1400 years ago and apply it to your neighbor who plays loud music, you are committing a crime against the text and the neighbor.
Right. Context is king.
But look at the baseline. The default state between a Muslim and a non-Muslim is peace, salam. The word Islam itself comes from the root salama, peace. You cannot have peace if you are permitted to cause harm. It's structurally impossible.
I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, the environment. You said people, but does this no harm rule extend further?
Absolutely. This is where it gets beautiful. It extends to animals and even plants. There's a narration where a woman was punished by God, sent to hell, because she locked up a cat. She didn't feed it, didn't let it hunt. She caused it harm.
Just a cat?
Just a cat. And on the flip side, a man was granted paradise because he climbed down a well to give water to a thirsty dog.
So, if you can't even harm a cat without facing divine justice, the idea of harming a human being because they have a different theology seems
ludicrous. It becomes absurd. If a dog has rights to safety and compassion, how much more does a human being have, who is created in what the Quran calls the best of molds?
It really dismantles the us versus them mentality regarding basic human dignity.
It does. And I think that's the challenge for modern believers. It's easy to be good to your own tribe. Everyone is good to their own tribe. Gangsters are loyal to their own. The test of a high moral frequency is how you treat the one who isn't like you.
It reminds me of that saying, character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you.
Exactly. And in Islam, it's deeper. Character is how you treat those whom you have the power to hurt, but you choose to protect instead. That is taqwa, God consciousness.
So, to wrap this up, if we look at the ledger, the spiritual accounting, harming a non-Muslim isn't a freebie. It's actually a liability that could cost you everything you've worked for spiritually.
It's a trapdoor. You could build a skyscraper of good deeds, and one act of injustice pulls the lever and drops you into the basement.
That's a sobering thought. It really shifts the focus from what do I believe to how do I behave.
Belief is the engine, but behavior is the wheels. If the wheels are crushing people, it doesn't matter how good the engine is.
If the wheels are crushing people, it doesn't matter how good the engine is. I love that.
And remember, the Prophet's mission was summarized in one sentence. I was sent only to perfect good character. Not to conquer, not to get rich. To perfect character. You cannot have good character while causing harm. It's an oxymoron.
It seems the red line is drawn in permanent ink. Do no harm, no exceptions.
No exceptions. To anyone.
Well, I think that leaves us with plenty to think about next time we're in a disagreement or feeling frustrated with someone different from us. It's not just about being nice. It's about spiritual survival.
Ideally, yes. It keeps us in check.
Thanks for breaking this down. It's a lot clearer and honestly, a little more intimidating than I expected.
A little intimidation is good for the soul sometimes. Keeps us humble.
Definitely. And for everyone listening, we'll leave you with that thought. Check your ledger. Make sure you aren't bankrupting yourself by hurting others, no matter who they are. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Peace.